Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to our YouTube channel. I am Mommy Milestones, and today we are processing some tomatoes. My son Murdoch has been growing these beautiful Roma tomatoes and an heirloom type tomato. We have been setting them out here. If they had been falling off, the vines have been dying, so you can see there's a lot of barely color changing. It's been getting cold. It was 38 degrees last night. And if we get a frost, these are going to sit here and get damaged. So we're sorting out the good ones. We're doing some processing today. The chickens will get these soft ones that fell on the ground and bad holes from worms or bugs. Good processing day. Good thing to be doing on this cool Sunday morning. Okay, so starting right out today, I've been working on getting my canner and my mason jars washed and set up on top of regular dishes and other farmhouse jobs. 2 containers full are washed and ready to start slicing. So I've got my cutting board, my knife set up. I've got my waste pot here. This will all be chicken scraps. This is going to be the tops. And anything that I run through the food mill is going to go in there. You can opt to core and seed and do it that way. The last time I did that, it added so much more time to it that I'm going to just risk a few seeds getting in my final tomatoes. It is a lot faster that way. I'm going to be chopping with the food processor instead of chopping by hand. So I'm basically slicing my tomatoes in half. This is a Cuisinart 12 cup food processor. It is great for this. It's also got a 4 cup smaller bowl that can go on there also if need be. I'm set up with my gloves. My bands are washed. We've got our lid lifter. This is magnetic so you don't have to hurt your hands. And a stirring pot. We are going to hot can or hot pack the tomatoes. My big pot for heating them up with my food mill set up on top. So everything is assembly line set up here. And while I am working on chopping here, I'm going to preheat my canner. I've got my jars washed, and at this point, basically, this is going to heat them up and sterilize them. When you do this, I always fill up my canner quite a bit at the bottom and add a little water to the jar. That way you're steaming it inside and out. Remember, when you add your jars ready to go, you're gonna likely have to adjust your water level here, either up or down. You need to be covered at least an inch above the tops of the jars. So if you're only doing pints, you wouldn't have to fill this all the way to the top, because displacement of water, you would fill it to about here, lower your jars into the bath, and that water level is going to come up. So keep that in mind. So I'm just going to go ahead and get this going under a high heat, and then I'll just turn it off and let it set while I continue processing my tomatoes through the food processor. Okay, so I've got my pot full of my processed tomatoes. We're going to bring this up to a boil so they're nice and hot. I have got my jars in my water bath canner, all hot with just the lid sitting on, simmering. So we're going to pull these out, have our lids and bands already preheated with scalding water. Pour hot water over the top of them. Don't boil them on the stovetop. That's against the advice of a lot of different programs in canning. It can damage the rubber seal on the lid top. So overheating this little rubber band can actually distort it or dissolve it to the point that you're not going to have sealing jars. So keep that in mind if you're having problems with your jars sealing. With water bath canning, you can always hear this seal popping down with a little ping noise as they're cooling over the 24 hours. You usually hear it within the first couple of minutes. So keep that in mind, and these are not reusable. This is a ball lid, and it is standard regular mouth. You can use wide mouth jars. For my tomatoes, I'm actually following the USDA canning standards for sauce because I have this blended down so small that this is similar to my pizza sauce anyway. So it's 40 minutes in the water bath canner, and 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. And if you want to use vinegar, keep in mind that it is 4 tablespoons of vinegar, but it can impart a slightly off taste. So the lemon juice seems to be a little more neutral in that. Of course, vinegar is cheaper and it is easier to find. You have the option of adding some teaspoons of salt to your jars directly if you like, or to your pot. I don't salt mine at all. I am salting my recipes as I'm using each jar of sauce or canned tomatoes. And I just alternate with that food processor whether I am running it for a short amount of time or a long amount of time. Basically, I want it like the stewed tomatoes that you get from a store, or crushed tomatoes. So that's what we were after. Okay, so we've got some hot jars here, and we're going to add our lemon juice. Again, it's 2 tablespoons per jar. I have 2 suggestions to give you here. The lemon juice is mellow, so that's nice. And like I said, I leave the salt out. My suggestion is, if you don't want to end up with a jar half full of water and half full of tomatoes, you can use a small strainer and fill your jars that way, leaving any liquid behind in the pot. However, you can end up with a lot of waste that way, just like this. But if you do it this way, you can end up with some waste in your pot because of running it through the food processor. So, but you can see there's a lot of clear liquid coming off of that. Doing this ends up saving you money in the end on lids and bands and jars, because you are not wasting jar capacity on water. So I'll turn the camera around and show you what I mean by that. As soon as I get these filled up, you want to work fairly quickly so that your jars stay hot. And you know, you're not going to get, see that, that's just clear liquid. So I don't feel bad about wasting that. Especially in this large pot. This is about a bushel of tomatoes. Your first jars that you fill are going to be a lot more volume of tomato than water, because you're taking off the top. Where your second or third batch of jars that you fill, you might end up with more water in your jars than tomato. So doing this, especially for, you know, continuing batches, I think is a really good idea. Another thing you can do, like with filling first, I like to use these heavy measuring cups to just dip right down into the pot and fill the jars. Once the jars are all filled, we'll clean the lids off. That one got a little bit too much. In that case, just have a little spoon here. I want about an inch headspace. So I like to go down to about this collar right here. Sometimes even just below. If you overfill your jars, it can cause your lids to not seal properly. And it can also cause seepage where the contents in your jar are leaking out into your water canner. It's especially prevalent in pressure canning, which you can do with these also. I can't tell you offhand what the time is for that. I like the easier pace of the water bath canner, but it does take more time. But there's no cool down time for a second batch. Now, and I've just dipped my cloth napkin into the hot water, and we're wiping all the rims. before we put the lids and bands on. This is going to help to make sure that you have full contact with the rim. And always, always, before you get this far, when you are setting up your canning, check the tops of your lids. If they have any nicks in them, your likelihood of sealing is greatly reduced. So keep that in mind. And I can tell you, with hot pack canning, make sure that you're keeping your pot of tomatoes hot in between batches. So that can mean setting it aside and then reheating it when your timer is getting low on a first batch, because in the 40 minutes that your jars are in the canner, it's going to cool off on you. A good tip about your canner is to add a couple of tablespoons of white vinegar to the water, and that will help you to not get a white powdery scale from hard water build up on your jars, and then you have perfectly beautiful jars when you're done. If you forget or you don't have it, you can always clean up your jars after the fact. And you can substitute apple cider vinegar in its place. Now save this water so that if you don't have enough water in your canner, you can add that hot water to it, because you want it to be close to the same temperature. So hand tight, not husband tight, you know, just real nice. And in the jar, in the pot they go. I always try to make sure that they're wiped off before they go in case I've splattered anything on the sides. So now we are just going to load these up in the canner. So when I load my canner, I am loading on these outside edges on that rack right where it's hanging, and that helps keeps you balanced as you are doing your loading. Now I actually got busy this afternoon, and after I processed my tomatoes, I had to take a break and take care of some farm chores, and was able to come back to this in the evening. Okay, now this one's a tricky, really big jar, so that one's going in the center. And right now I've got 6 there. We'll grab one more and we will lower it down and put them in. Okay, so we're making sure that we have hot water, and this has got to go an inch over your jar tops. And then the lid goes on it. We're going to let that heat up, and once we hear that boiling, we're going to set the timer for 40 minutes. No less. Going more isn't going to really help you. And from what I understand, all of these recipes are for about 1,000 feet elevation. If you have a higher elevation, check online, check your canning book for your appropriate canning times. So this is the excess liquid or water that I was talking about. I forgot to grab my strainer because we were in the middle of a piano lesson at the time when I was working on this. So I just quickly filled them up and put them in the canner. And as soon as I pulled the first one out, I realized my mistake. So like I said, a lot of jar space being wasted here because I forgot to filter out with the strainer to get just the tomato. It's okay though, for the most part. These are all going to be used in chili, and I always end up adding water anyway, so it's just going to be pre-seasoned like broth, so it'll have that slight tomato flavor to it. And any extra liquid that was in my pot for my second batch gets fed to the chicken, so we do some grain fermenting, and that water will be used for that. So our timer just went off, and I've been pulling out my jars. Now this was my last jar that I put in there, and I was a little low, so you can see I have a little bit of water separation there. But look at the secret of using that strainer, of going from this, just dipping it out with a measuring cup, to this. I have none It all stayed in the pot. So that is a neat trick to know. Nobody I ever canned with in my life, I've been canning for 30 years, has never explained that to me or showed that to me. And I've been dealing with the last 15 years of having jars like this in my pantry. And generally that's something that you would see with chopped, stewed, big whole pieces, half pieces of tomatoes, where you're actually adding liquid to the jar and filling it with hot water. This is so much better, so much prettier. Look at that. I just love it. This is a real neat old jar. I've said in my other canning videos, my mom gave me her old jars. This one says Glenshaw. I have never seen any of these anywhere else. I have about 3 of them. I've got a couple that say Moms. This one says Presto. And they're just so neat to have this variety and to use them. This was a perfect day for me to be canning in the kitchen because it's been a nice cold weather day and we haven't had to run the wood-fired furnace all that much. The canning kept the house plenty warm on its own. So now I can rest for the night, wake up in the morning and see my beautiful jars sitting here, get them labeled and put them in my pantry tomorrow afternoon. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope these tips helped you a lot with your canning. We're near the end of our season here. I'll probably have one more batch of tomatoes to do before we are done in the garden with tomatoes, and then we'll be moving on to potatoes. It's going to be a great harvest for our whole year this year. The pantry is looking wonderful. The trees, the apple trees are ready to go, so we're going to be moving into apples and applesauce real soon too. So thanks for watching. Subscribe so you can see those next videos coming out. That notification bell will let you know when a new video has been released, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.